The study, which I will be discussing, evaluates treatment strategy of high-risk smoldering myeloma. Very briefly, myeloma, once it's developed from MGUS, is divided into smoldering and myeloma requiring treatment, and smoldering myeloma is by current guidelines observed without therapy, as at that stage of disease there is no evidence of organ damage. However, we recognize subsets of smoldering myeloma meeting criteria for high-risk smoldering myeloma, which is at increased risk of progression by some criteria. More than 50% of patients in 2 years would require treatment. And there is ongoing effort for the last several years to see whether intervention and treatment at this stage of disease would make a difference for patients. And the general way of approaching has been by either trying to prevent progression to active myeloma by maybe more gentle interventions, or by using more intensive interventions, as in this study, which I'll be discussing, with attempt to maybe potentially even eliminate the disease. That's in the background, which we have started the study. We have taken advantage of previous work which was done in newly diagnosed myeloma. And among the most active regimens in myeloma is a combination of carfilzomib, lenalidomide, and dexamethasone, which has shown very high activity in number of phase 2 studies, newly diagnosed myeloma, as well as this meeting at Forte trial, which showed in randomized large Italian study that we call this regimen KRD in short, is highly active, generating high rates of stringent complete responses and MRD negative disease. So that was one of the reasons why for ASCENT trial, KRD as a backbone of treatment was selected with goal to potentially achieve as high rates of not detectable disease measured as stringent complete response as possible. I would have to add that there is another similar study in progress in Spain. The study is called CAESAR trial, which is using KRD induction followed by transplant followed by KRD consolidation. Dr. Mari Mateo already presented the preliminary results of this study at a number of meetings, including at last ASH 2019, showing truly high rates of complete and stringent complete responses and MRD negativity, and very promising progression-free survival curves, which is eventually what will be measured in that particular study. In ASCENT trial, which we discuss, we moved forward with addition of antibody daratumumab to KRD as a backbone, rather than by using transplant like in CAESAR trial. But in general, it's a similar approach. It is using the best, as we think, might be the best tools we have in our anti-myeloma therapy toolbox for treatment of high-risk smoldering myeloma. This is a very preliminary report at this meeting, indicating and focused primarily on safety. Primary endpoint for this study is rate of stringent complete response, which we have not yet reported because study is not mature enough to make this yet available for inclusion in our reporting as per study design. So to follow study design, the study have showed that there is very much expected tolerability and toxicity based on the data which we generated in patients with newly diagnosed myeloma requiring treatment, like for example, in Forte trial, which I mentioned, or in recently published by Dr. Jasaleks from Multiple Myeloma Research Consortium, led by University of Chicago study with KRD and transplant. Those studies have indicated there are some toxicities expected for both carfilzomib and lenalidomide in combination, but we have not observed any increased risk of toxicities in smoldering population. Importantly, the rate of grade 3 or 4 toxicities or dose modifications was low. There was only one discontinuation out of total 54 patients so far involved for toxicity, and overall regimen has been fairly well tolerated. That's our conclusion. And I should mention that the study has certain fixed treatment plan. It's a one-arm study. There is no randomization. And there is 6 cycles of induction where daratumumab antibody is given more intensively in a weekly schedule with KRD at optimal doses, and then 6 cycles of consolidation when daratumumab is given every 4 weeks. And then that follows by lenalidomide and daratumumab maintenance with daratumumab given every 8 weeks and lenalidomide at the maintenance schedule. So that's overall treatment plan. We need to complete enrollment for that particular study. We are approaching the number of patients we need to be enrolled, and have observed patients on treatment long enough that we can potentially focus on our primary endpoint, which is stringent complete response. I think that earlier results before these treatments mature enough will not give us information which we are looking for. The reason is that we have already observed, and that has been clearly documented number of studies, including in our KRD and transplant trial, that it takes time to reach stringent complete response. In our study with transplant, for example, the median time to achievement stringent complete response is about 12 months from the start of treatment. And even beyond that point, there are some patients who are increasing their stringent complete response. So to really know what is the rate of stringent complete responses, primary endpoint, we need a little bit more time, enroll all patients and have all the patients advanced enough. So that's the next step, getting that study completed and generating enough results that we can look at our primary objective. Yeah, I think that it is worth noticing that there is a lot of emerging data with quadruplet KRD and DARA combination, which has been presented at prior meetings, including the results from master trial led by Dr. Costa at last ASH, and also by Dr. Landgren from Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center with maybe shorter duration or 8 cycles of DARA KRD. I want to add that we have, I was presenting presented relatively small, only over 20 patient group of patients with newly diagnosed myeloma treated with DARA-KRD combination, patients requiring treatment, so not smoldering myeloma. But the results after updates are really looking quite promising. The paper is under review, pending response to reviewers, so it will be probably published in near future. It will be probably first paper with this quadruplet combination, giving viewers and those who are interested a sense what is achievable with this quadruplet combination. There are some differences in between different study designs with quadruplet. We have ongoing KRD and DARA treatment for 24 cycles, which is also more or less halfway through enrollment. So a lot of data with this quadruplet is coming. I think I would like to add that ASCENT trial is collecting MRD data by next-gene sequencing. Also master trial, as well as Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, which use MRD by flow, but it's still pretty sensitive flow MRD. We are collecting MRD data in our study, a number of other studies as well. So we are still relatively early, but preliminary results indicate that the daratumumab, as expected, as it has been in some other quadruplet combinations, is improving depths of response, particularly rates of stringent complete responses and MRD negativity. And they are beyond what we have already observed with KRD without daratumumab. And for example, in our KRD and transplant trial, which is a little bit different because the transplant does add to potential of KRD, but ultimately we had 70% of patients as best response achieving MRD negativity by current IMWG criteria. So it just tells you that this is really truly good backbone, and I would anticipate that additional of daratumumab instead of transplant may have similar potential in terms of efficacy as transplant, and may potentially truly evaluate, reduce the disease to depths which might be compatible with hope for a cure. And that's the ultimate objective of the smoldering study. I would like to add that the reason why we are evaluating in smoldering myeloma is that number one, we know that this group of patients will require treatment with high probability in months or years to come. So, and there is a presumption that in earlier phase of myeloma, like in smoldering, even high risk, there may be less genetic dysregulations, maybe improved probability of achieving better outcome than in myeloma, which by current criteria requires treatment. So there is, in short, attempt to really capture those two important background observation that smoldering myeloma may need treatment, and if we treat it earlier, we may have better chance of achieving even better responses than in newly diagnosed myeloma. And hopefully that's the bottom line of where we are going, elimination of the disease. This ASH meeting deserves more than just a couple of sentences. There was a number of very intriguing and very well done studies looking at biology of smoldering myeloma, which seem to be, in short, indicating that there is potentially even more complex subset of myeloma patients in smoldering phase, depending on their immune control, which is changing over time, and also some genetic composition of the myeloma, with some very bold proposals to identify smoldering myeloma as a composition of truly smoldering myeloma with a low probability of progression to active disease and with good control, mostly by immune means. And the other group will be myeloma already marching to be active myeloma requiring treatment, just not yet at this stage by current criteria. What it means that I think we may potentially refine our inclusion criteria in future studies and maybe focus on our efforts in maybe first subset of myeloma with reasonably control on trying to find the ways that this control is preserved and maintained and keeps the disease from progression for the rest of the patient's life. That would be very justified, I think, for this subset of patients. And for the group, which is essentially already myeloma, but just not meeting CRAB and SLIM criteria, trying to find the most effective curative approach with attempt to elimination, with hope that this disease indeed could be more amenable to elimination than in later stages.